Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment telling us what you think will happen between Ricardo and Mariana. The crystal chandelier in the Valdez mansion had witnessed countless elegant soirees, business negotiations worth millions, and the quiet desperation of a father who hadn't slept properly in 3 weeks. Ricardo Valdez stood in the center of his Polanco living room, his $5,000 Italian suit wrinkled beyond repair, his usually impeccable dark hair disheveled and falling into his exhausted eyes, and his legendary patience hanging by the thinnest of threads imaginable. "She won't stop crying," he said to the elderly woman before him, his voice hoarse from sleepless nights. "You're the 7th nanny this month, the 7th qualified professional. Tell me you have something different to offer than the previous 6 who fled." The woman adjusted her thick glasses and smoothed down her conservative grey dress, opening her mouth to respond with what Ricardo assumed would be the same platitudes he'd heard from every childcare professional in Mexico City. But before she could utter a single word, the sound that had become the constant soundtrack of Ricardo's waking nightmares pierced through the mansion's walls with devastating force. Camilla's wailing echoed down the marble staircase, desperate and unending, the kind of raw, primal cry that made every adult in the vicinity feel utterly helpless and inadequate. The nanny's face paled visibly, her composure cracking like fine porcelain dropped on stone. "Perhaps the child needs a different kind of specialist," she suggested nervously, already reaching for her expensive leather purse with trembling fingers. "A doctor who specializes in trauma, or perhaps a child psychiatrist with more experience in she's seen 12 specialists." Ricardo cut her off with barely contained frustration, running both hands through his disheveled hair in a gesture that had become unconscious habit. "Pediatricians from the best hospitals in the country, neurologists who charge more per hour than most people earn in a month, child psychologists with international reputations. They all say the same thing: she's physically healthy. They all diagnose psychological trauma from losing her mother." His jaw tightened painfully. "And they all leave without actually helping her, every single one of them." The nanny was already heading for the ornate mahogany door, her heels clicking rapidly against the marble floor in a rhythm that spoke of barely controlled panic. "I'm terribly sorry, Senor Valdez. I simply cannot work under these conditions. My nerves simply won't allow." The front door opened before she could reach it, and the fleeing woman nearly collided with another figure entering the mansion without announcement or invitation. Ricardo's longtime housekeeper, Doña Carmen, stepped aside with an expression of surprised confusion to reveal a young woman who seemed entirely unfazed by the chaos surrounding her. She was perhaps 28 years old, with honey-colored hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that somehow managed to look elegant despite its simplicity, and eyes the color of warm coffee with flecks of gold that caught the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. She wore simple but well-maintained clothes, a cream silk blouse tucked neatly into modest dark pants, but she carried herself with a quiet dignity that made the expensive furnishings and priceless art around her seem almost irrelevant by comparison. In her hands she held a small leather bag, worn with age but meticulously clean and carefully maintained. "I'm here about the nanny position," she said calmly, her clear voice cutting through Camilla's distant cries like a gentle melody through static, somehow bringing a moment of clarity to the chaos. Ricardo stared at her with undisguised confusion and irritation. "We don't have any more interviews scheduled today. The employment agency assured me—" "I'm not from the agency," she interrupted smoothly, and something in her directness, her complete lack of the usual deference, made him pause mid-sentence. "My name is Mariana Torres. I heard about your situation from the pharmacy on Presidente Masaryk. The pharmacist mentioned that you've been personally purchasing every sleep aid and stress medication on the market for 3 consecutive weeks. You heard about my daughter from a pharmacy employee?" Ricardo's eyebrows rose dramatically toward his hairline. And based on pharmaceutical gossip, you decided to just show up uninvited at my private residence? I decided to offer my help to a child who clearly needs it desperately. Mariana's unwavering gaze didn't break from his. Unless you'd prefer to continue your current strategy of cycling through terrified professionals who run at the first sign of difficulty. That seems to be working wonderfully for you. Bo, the seventh nanny of the month, squeezed past Mariana without a word of farewell and disappeared into the bright Mexico City afternoon, the sound of her heels fading rapidly down the stone pathway. Ricardo should have been deeply offended by this stranger's presumption. He should have called his security team immediately to escort her out. Instead, he found himself studying this unusual woman, who had walked into his home uninvited and spoken to him without the usual deference and nervousness that people invariably reserved for men of his considerable status and wealth. It had been so long since anyone had treated him like something other than a walking checkbook or a problem to be carefully managed that he'd almost forgotten what genuine directness felt like. "You have no references that I can verify," he said finally, crossing his arms over his chest in a defensive posture. "No credentials I can confirm through proper channels. No logical reason for me to trust you anywhere near my vulnerable daughter. You have desperation written in every line of your face, and a child whose heart-wrenching cries I can hear clearly from here," Mariana replied with remarkable evenness. "Remarkable. I'd say we're both working with severely limited options at this point. The question is whether your pride is more important than your daughter's welfare." Above them, Camilla's crying intensified dramatically, each wrenching sob more heart-rending than the last, the sound of a child in genuine distress that no parent could possibly ignore. Mariana tilted her head slightly to one side, listening with an intensity that seemed almost clinical in its focus. Her expression shifted, not to the sympathy Ricardo had seen on countless faces, but to something more analytical, more focused and purposeful. How long has she been crying exactly like this? Since her mother died in a car accident, 8 months ago, almost to the day. No. Mariana shook her head slowly, her ponytail swaying gently with the movement. I mean this episode specifically, this particular crying session. How long has it been going on? Ricardo frowned at the unusual specificity of the question. "She started around 6 this morning. She stops briefly for meals, sometimes falls asleep from sheer exhaustion, but the moment she wakes up again, she reaches for her head immediately." Mariana finished for him, her eyes sharpening with something that looked almost like recognition. "She touches the exact same spot every time. Behind her left ear, near where the skull meets the neck." The color drained from Ricardo's face so quickly he felt momentarily dizzy. "How could you possibly know that? Have you been watching my house? Spying on my daughter?" But Mariana was already moving with purposeful strides toward the sweeping marble staircase. She paused with her hand resting lightly on the polished banister and looked back at him with an expression that brooked no argument. "Are you coming, Señor Valdez? Or would you prefer to stand there questioning my methods while your daughter continues to suffer needlessly upstairs?" Ricardo followed without further protest. He told himself it was because he had absolutely no other viable choice, because he was desperate enough at this point to try anything, even trusting a complete stranger who had walked in off the street. But something in the way Mariana moved, purposeful, certain, as if she knew exactly what she would find upstairs, made him feel something he hadn't experienced in many painful months. Against all logic and reason, he felt hope. Camilla's room was a pastel paradise of expensive imported toys and designer stuffed animals, a space designed by the most sought-after decorators in Mexico City to be the perfect sanctuary for a beloved little girl. But the child, huddled in the center of the elegant canopy bed, looked anything but peaceful or pampered. Her dark curls were matted with dried tears, her small face red and swollen from endless crying, and her tiny hands kept reaching up repeatedly to clutch the same spot on the side of her head with desperate repetitive movements. "Camilla," Ricardo said softly, approaching the bed with the careful movements of a man who had learned through painful experience that sudden gestures only made things worse. "Sweetheart, there's someone new here who wants to meet you." The little girl's cries didn't diminish in the slightest. If anything, they grew louder and more frantic at the mention of yet another stranger. She'd learned through 8 months of painful experience that new people meant more poking, more prodding, more strangers who couldn't help her and would eventually leave just like all the others. Mariana didn't approach immediately, displaying a patience that none of the previous professionals had shown. Instead, she knelt down gracefully several feet from the bed, bringing herself to exactly the child's eye level, and began to hum a gentle melody. It was a simple tune, something that sounded like an old traditional lullaby, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, Camilla's desperate sobs began to quiet into hiccups and sniffles. "Hello, pequeña," Mariana said softly, when the child finally looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. "My name is Mariana. I'm not going to hurt you or poke you or examine you. I'm not even going to touch you unless you say it's completely okay. But I think I might know what's making your head hurt so very much. Would you let me look? Just look, nothing else." Camilla's watery brown eyes darted to her father, standing helplessly nearby, then back to this new woman who somehow seemed different from all the others. There was something in the child's desperate gaze, a flicker of cautious hope that mirrored her father's own expression perfectly. Slowly, tentatively, the little girl nodded her assent. Mariana approached the bed with careful, measured movements, as if she were approaching a frightened wild animal that might bolt at any moment. She sat on the very edge of the mattress, maintaining a respectful distance, and gently, so gently it was almost imperceptible, reached toward Camilla's left ear. Ricardo watched with his heart pounding against his ribs, barely daring to breathe. He'd had specialists from 3 different countries examine his daughter extensively. Neurologists had performed every scan modern medicine could offer. Pediatricians had conducted the most thorough examinations possible. And this woman, this complete stranger who had walked in off the street with nothing but confidence and a worn leather bag, thought she could find something they'd all somehow missed. Mariana's fingers carefully parted Camilla's dark curls behind her small ear, and then she went very, very still. Her face remained carefully calm and composed, but something significant flashed in her golden brown eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or vindication of a suspicion she hadn't voiced. "Señor Valdez," she said quietly, her voice carefully controlled to avoid alarming the child, "I need you to come here right now, and I need you to remain completely calm when you see what I'm about to show you." Ricardo crossed the room in 3 rapid strides, his expensive shoes silent on the plush carpet. Mariana tilted Camilla's head slightly to the side, and he saw it, something so small, so easily overlooked, hidden perfectly in the junction where his daughter's skull met her delicate neck. A tiny object, metallic and glinting faintly in the soft bedroom light, embedded just beneath the surface of her skin. "What in God's name is that?" he breathed, his voice barely above a horrified whisper. Mariana's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a muscle jumping near her temple. "That," she said with quiet certainty, "is something that should never have been there in the first place, and I know exactly what it is." The private examination room at Hospital Angeles Pedregal was as sterile and imposing as Ricardo's fraying patience was thin. He paced the length of the pristine room like a caged predator, while Camilla slept peacefully in the hospital bed for the first time in what felt like forever, the mysterious object now safely removed and being analyzed by a team of increasingly alarmed specialists who had never seen anything like it in their careers. A subcutaneous tracking device with additional functionality, the lead surgeon had explained, his distinguished face pale with shock and professional outrage. Extremely sophisticated technology, nothing commercially available that we know of. It was designed to cause increasing discomfort over time, escalating gradually until the subject was driven to seek medical attention where it would presumably be discovered by someone who knew exactly what to look for and where to find it. "Who knew to look for it?" Ricardo had demanded, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. Who put it there in the first place, and how did she, that woman, know what it was and where to find it? But Mariana Torres had disappeared somewhere between the emergency surgery and the recovery room, vanishing like smoke without leaving any contact information, any explanation, or any answers to the 1,000 questions burning in Ricardo's mind. Now, 12 hours later, Camilla was awake and radiantly alert, chattering happily to the charmed nurses about her stuffed rabbit named Señor Orejas, as if the nightmare of the past 8 months had never happened at all. And Ricardo had sent his entire security team to find the enigmatic woman who had saved his daughter's life, only to vanish without explanation. They found her at a modest apartment in Colonia Roma Norte, in a building that had clearly seen better decades, but maintained a certain faded dignity. When Ricardo arrived, alone, against his security team's strenuous protests, he found her sitting on the worn front steps of the building, as if she'd been expecting him all along. "You could have asked for money first," he said without preamble, dispensing with social niceties entirely. "You could have negotiated a massive reward before telling me what was wrong with my daughter. You could have leveraged the situation for everything it was worth. Instead, you simply disappeared without a word." Mariana looked up at him from her seat on the steps, her expression carefully unreadable in the fading evening light. "Your daughter needed immediate medical attention. Negotiating payment while a child suffered wasn't exactly a priority I was willing to consider." "So you do want payment then?" He reached for his checkbook with practiced ease. "Name your price. Whatever it is, I'll pay it without question." "I don't want your money, Señor Valdez." Brucey. He stared at her in genuine confusion. In his extensive experience, everyone wanted money in one form or another. It was the universal motivator, the solution to virtually every problem he'd ever encountered. "Then what exactly do you want from me?" Mariana was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant as if weighing decisions of considerable magnitude. Behind her, the sounds of Roma Norte's vibrant evening life filled the air. Street vendors calling out their wares, live music drifting from nearby cafes, the constant energetic hum of the city that never truly slept. Finally, she rose gracefully to her feet. "I want the job," she said with quiet certainty. "The nanny position. I want to take care of your daughter on a permanent basis. Let me understand this correctly. You show up completely uninvited at my home, demonstrate specialized knowledge that no ordinary person should possibly have, find something embedded in my daughter that a dozen world-class specialists entirely missed, disappear without explanation, and now you want to become her nanny?" Ricardo shook his head slowly in disbelief. "Who are you really, Mariana Torres? And please don't insult my intelligence by claiming you're just a concerned citizen who happened to overhear something at the right pharmacy at the right time." For the first time since he'd met her, he saw something genuine flicker across her carefully composed features, something that looked almost like old, deep pain threatening to surface. "I'm someone who knows about devices like the one in your daughter's head because I spent years of my life helping develop the technology to detect them." Ricardo went very still, his businessman's instincts suddenly alert to deeper currents beneath this conversation. "You're a scientist?" "I was." Her voice hardened perceptibly, taking on an edge he hadn't heard before. "Until the company I worked for started selling that detection technology and the implant devices themselves to people who had absolutely no legitimate business having access to either. And you believe someone used that technology on my innocent daughter? For what possible purpose? She's only 5 years old." Mariana's golden brown eyes met his directly, unflinching and intense. "Your wife died 8 months ago, Señor Valdez. The exact same week the implant was surgically placed in your daughter's head. Someone went to extraordinary lengths to ensure that Camilla would eventually end up in a hospital, examined by increasingly desperate doctors, her psychological distress thoroughly documented in medical records. Someone wanted to create irrefutable evidence that you were incapable of caring for your own child. The blood drained from Ricardo's face so quickly, he felt genuinely unsteady on his feet. He thought of the custody conversations his late wife's wealthy family had been having with increasing frequency. The subtle suggestions from his sister-in-law that Camilla might be better off living with her grandparents at their estate in Monterey. The expensive lawyers who had been circling like patient vultures, waiting for the right moment to strike. You're suggesting that someone in my wife's own family, I'm saying someone with considerable resources and powerful connections, wanted custody of your daughter, and they were willing to cause her months of genuine suffering to achieve that goal. Mariana's voice was deliberately calm, but there was unmistakable steel beneath its surface. The question now is, what are you going to do about it? Ricardo should have been entirely focused on revenge at this moment, on investigation and legal action, on finding whoever had hurt his innocent daughter and making them pay dearly for every tear she had shed. Instead, he found himself studying the woman before him, this complete enigma who had appeared out of nowhere with knowledge she shouldn't possess and motivations he couldn't begin to understand. "Why do you care about any of this?" he asked finally, genuinely curious. "What's your personal stake in my family's tragedy?" Mariana was quiet for another long moment, the sounds of the city filling the silence between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, the protective steel replaced by something more vulnerable and human. "Because 3 years ago, I tried to blow the whistle on the company that created those implant devices. I gathered evidence meticulously, went to every authority I could find, did everything exactly right and by the book." She paused, her jaw tightening. "And in return for my honesty, they destroyed my career completely, my professional reputation and my credibility in every circle that mattered. They made absolutely certain that no one in the technology industry would ever hire me again. They erased the person I used to be. So you want revenge against them?" "I want justice," she corrected him firmly. "There's a significant difference between those two things. And right now, your daughter's case might finally be the key to getting it after 3 years of waiting." Ricardo should have walked away from this complicated situation. This woman was clearly damaged by her past, carrying emotional baggage that could significantly complicate his already chaotic life. But he thought of Camilla sleeping peacefully in that hospital bed for the first time in 8 months. He thought of the way Mariana had knelt down patiently to his daughter's level, gentle and calm, while every other professional had approached her like a problem to be efficiently solved and billed for. "The position comes with accommodations in the guest house on my property," he heard himself saying, surprising even himself, "and a salary that appropriately reflects the unusual circumstances of this arrangement." Mariana's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise. "You're actually serious about this? You'd hire someone whose primary qualification is apparently a personal vendetta against a technology company that wronged her?" "I'm hiring someone who saved my daughter's life and apparently possesses skills that my entire expensive security team completely lacks." He paused thoughtfully. "Plus, having you close by means I can keep a careful eye on you. Make sure your quest for justice doesn't inadvertently put Camilla at any additional risk." "Fair enough." Mariana extended her hand toward him formally. "Do we have a deal, Señor Valdez?" Ricardo took her offered hand. Her grip was firm and confident, her skin surprisingly warm against his palm. Something significant passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of the strange alliance they were forming out of necessity, and perhaps something more that neither was quite ready to examine closely. "Ricardo," he said quietly, "if you're going to be living in my home and caring for my daughter on a daily basis, you should probably start calling me Ricardo." The ghost of a genuine smile crossed Mariana's face for the first time, softening her features considerably. "Don't worry, Ricardo. I'm absolutely certain I'll find plenty of other things to call you once I get to know you better." Despite everything weighing on him, his bone-deep exhaustion, his constant worry, his lingering suspicion, Ricardo felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward involuntarily. It had been a very long time since anyone had spoken to him with such casual irreverence. Longer still since he'd found it genuinely charming rather than deeply irritating. "Welcome to the Valdez household," he said with dry humor. "I'm quite sure it won't be dull." 3 weeks had passed since Mariana Torres moved into the elegant guest house on the Valdez estate, and Ricardo was beginning to suspect that he'd made a terrible, wonderful mistake. Not because Camilla wasn't thriving, she absolutely was, beyond his most optimistic hopes. His daughter had transformed from a broken, constantly crying shell of herself into a vibrant, laughing child who played energetically, ate enthusiastically, and talked endlessly about her wonderful new nanny who knew everything about everything. No, Ricardo's mistake was in severely underestimating just how much Mariana's constant presence would disrupt his carefully ordered, predictable life in ways he hadn't anticipated. "Your daughter needs consistent routine," Mariana announced one morning, intercepting him in the hallway with practiced efficiency as he attempted to slip out quietly for an early meeting downtown. "That means eating breakfast together as a family, every single day without exception, not just when it happens to be convenient for your schedule." Ricardo stared at her in disbelief, momentarily speechless. In the soft, golden morning light streaming through the tall windows, her honey-colored hair looked almost luminous, and there was a healthy flush to her cheeks that suggested she'd already been awake and active for several hours. "I have an extremely important meeting with international investors. You have a daughter who spent 8 consecutive months believing that the whole world had abandoned her when she needed help most." Mariana's voice was firm, but not unkind. Reasonable, but absolutely unyielding. 30 minutes of your undivided attention, that's all I'm asking. Surely your empire can survive without you for half an hour. He should have overruled her immediately with executive authority. He was her employer, after all, paying her a substantial salary. He could simply walk past her and out the door. But something in her steady gaze, a combination of challenge and absolute certainty in her position, made him set down his expensive leather briefcase with a sigh of resignation. 30 minutes exactly, he conceded with poor grace. But I'm definitely taking a conference call during coffee. Some things simply cannot wait. No, you're absolutely not. She was already walking with purpose toward the sunny breakfast room at the back of the house. You're going to be completely present with your daughter, fully present in the moment. It's not nearly as difficult as you seem determined to believe it is. Ricardo followed, grumbling under his breath about insubordinate employees who didn't understand business realities and the demands of running a major corporation. But when he entered the bright breakfast room to find Camilla absolutely beaming at him from her seat at the table, already chattering excitedly about her vivid dreams from the night before, the complaints died instantly on his lips. "Papa! Mariana says we're going to the park today if I eat all my breakfast like a good girl. Will you come with us? Please, please, please." He opened his mouth automatically to refuse. He had critical reports to review, calls to make, an empire to run efficiently. But Mariana's words echoed insistently in his mind. Fully present. Be here now. "We'll see about the park, mi amor. First tell me all about these dreams of yours." As Camilla launched enthusiastically into an elaborate description of a magical flying elephant made entirely of fluffy clouds, Ricardo found his eyes drifting almost involuntarily to Mariana. She was preparing Camilla's breakfast plate with practiced ease and obvious care, cutting fresh fruit into perfect bite-sized pieces, ensuring everything was arranged just so to be appealing to a child's eye. There was an unconscious grace to her movements that seemed at odds with her practical, no-nonsense demeanor, a refinement that spoke of a very different upbringing than her modest current circumstances would suggest. "You're staring at me," she said without bothering to look up from her task. "Is there something on my face that concerns you, or are you simply fascinated by the intricate art of breakfast preparation?" Neither. Ricardo reached hastily for his coffee cup, covering his embarrassment with the familiar gesture. I was actually wondering where you learned to handle children so naturally and easily. Your professional background is in technology development, not childcare. A shadow crossed Mariana's face, so brief he might have imagined it entirely. I had younger siblings. I helped raise them after our mother got sick. Had? Have, she corrected herself quickly. Perhaps too quickly, Ricardo noted. I have younger siblings. They're fully grown now, of course, living their own lives elsewhere. Ricardo filed away the verbal slip carefully, adding it to the growing list of mysteries surrounding his daughter's enigmatic nanny. In the weeks since her unexpected arrival, he'd noticed numerous other inconsistencies. The way she moved through expensive spaces with an ease that suggested intimate familiarity rather than discomfort. The occasional slip into formal speech patterns that didn't match her supposed humble background. The books in at least 5 different languages he'd glimpsed through her guesthouse window during evening walks. You know, he said conversationally, keeping his tone deliberately casual, for someone who claims to be a disgraced technology worker, you have remarkably expensive and refined taste in literature. Mariana's hands stilled for just a moment, the only sign that his observation had registered. Charity shops carry all kinds of books, Senor Valdez. You'd be surprised what people donate. Ricardo, he reminded her with slight irritation, and charity shops don't typically carry first editions of classic Spanish literature with handwritten inscriptions from famous authors. Her eyes met his then, and he saw something complex flash in their golden brown depths, surprise, perhaps, or reluctant admiration at his observational skills. You've been investigating me. I'm a businessman. Thorough due diligence is second nature when bringing someone into my household. No. And what did your thorough due diligence reveal about me? Ricardo set down his coffee cup deliberately. That Mariana Torres doesn't appear to exist as a person, at least not before 3 years ago. No birth certificate, no educational records, no employment history beyond a few scattered odd jobs that may or may not have been real positions. He leaned forward slightly. So who exactly were you before you became the mysterious woman who walks into strangers' homes and saves their children from inexplicable suffering? The silence stretched between them, broken only by Camilla's oblivious happy chatter about her cloud elephant who could grant wishes. Finally, Mariana spoke, her voice quieter than before. I was someone who made a terrible mistake by trusting the wrong people, she said, with obvious reluctance. Someone who trusted completely and lost everything because of that misplaced trust, including my name. That's very poetic and moving, but it doesn't actually answer my question. No, she agreed with a small nod. It doesn't. She finished arranging Camilla's colorful plate and set it before the child with a gentle, warm smile. But it's all the answer you're going to get, for now. Before Ricardo could press further for real answers, his phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. He glanced at the screen and felt his jaw tighten painfully. What is it? Mariana asked, clearly noting his sudden change in expression with sharp perception. Nothing that concerns you. If it involves Camila in any way, it absolutely concerns me. Ricardo hesitated for a moment, then held up the phone so she could read the message on the screen. It was from his corporate lawyer, Victoria Valdez, filing for emergency custody. Claims documented child endangerment. Court date set for next week. Victoria Valdez, Mariana read aloud slowly. Your late wife's sister, Ricardo finished grimly, his voice tight, who has apparently decided that the device in my daughter's head wasn't achieving results fast enough for her timeline. Mariana's expression hardened into something cold and determined, her eyes going flat. She was behind the implant? I don't have proof yet that will hold up in court. He stood abruptly, suddenly unable to remain seated, while his world crumbled around him. But she's been circling my family like a vulture since Elena died, making subtle suggestions about Camilla's welfare, dropping hints that a single father running a major company can't possibly provide adequate care for a young girl. A single father whose daughter spent 8 consecutive months in apparent psychological distress, Mariana added quietly, understanding dawning. All thoroughly documented by 12 different medical specialists in their records. Ricardo's blood ran cold as he finally understood the full scope of the conspiracy. The implant wasn't just designed to cause suffering, it was meant to create a paper trail. Evidence that I was neglecting my daughter's care. Evidence that would support a custody challenge in court. Mariana's voice was grim. This was planned meticulously, Ricardo, by someone who understood exactly how the medical and legal systems would respond. He looked at her, this woman who had appeared out of nowhere with answers to questions he hadn't known to ask. You said you wanted justice, that my daughter's case could be the key. Yes. Then help me. It wasn't a request. It was almost a desperate plea. Help me protect my daughter and prove what Victoria did. And in return, I'll use every resource at my disposal to take down the company that ruined your life. Mariana studied him for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. Then she extended her hand toward him. Partners, then. Ricardo took her hand firmly, and this time, the electricity that passed between them was completely unmistakable. Not just alliance, not just necessity, something far more dangerous, something that neither of them was ready to name or examine closely. From her seat at the breakfast table, Camilla watched her father and her nanny with the uncanny perception that children sometimes display. "Papa," she announced decisively, "I think Mariana should stay with us forever." Ricardo released Mariana's hand quickly, suddenly very interested in his coffee cup. "Eat your breakfast, mi amor." Dave, but as he snuck a glance at Mariana, he caught her hiding a smile behind her own cup, and despite the threat looming over his family, despite the mysteries that still surrounded her, Ricardo felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. He felt like maybe, just maybe, things might actually be okay. It was a dangerous feeling. But then again, everything about Mariana Torres was dangerous, and somehow that made him want to get even closer to the flame. The courtroom in the Tribunal Superior de Justicia de la Ciudad de Mexico was nothing like the sterile, modern spaces Ricardo was accustomed to navigating. The wood-paneled walls held decades of family disputes, custody battles, and broken dreams within their grain. Today, they would witness another battle, one that Ricardo was determined to win at any cost. Victoria Valdez sat across the aisle, immaculately dressed in a black designer suit that probably cost more than most families spent on groceries in a year. Her lawyer, a shark named Licenciado Mendoza, who had never lost a custody case, shuffled papers with the confidence of a man who already knew the outcome. Victoria's expression was one of practiced concern, the perfect mask of a loving aunt worried about her niece's welfare. Ricardo's hands clenched beneath the table. He knew the truth behind that mask now, the carefully orchestrated plan to implant a device in his daughter's head, the calculated suffering inflicted on an innocent child, all to create the paper trail that would strip him of his parental rights. But proving it was another matter entirely. "The evidence is clear, Your Honor," Licenciado Mendoza was saying, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Medical records from 12 different specialists document 8 months of psychological distress. The child showed signs of severe emotional neglect. Señor Valdez, despite his considerable resources, failed to provide adequate care for his daughter during the most vulnerable period of her young life. Ricardo's lawyer, Licenciada Herrera, rose to object. "Your Honor, my client had no way of knowing that his daughter's distress was caused by a surgically implanted device. The moment the true cause was discovered, he took immediate action. A device that conveniently appeared just as Señor Valdez began a new relationship with a woman of questionable background." Mendoza interrupted smoothly. "A woman who, according to our investigation, doesn't exist in any official records prior to 3 years ago. A woman who somehow knew exactly where to find this so-called device, that a dozen medical professionals missed. Ricardo felt ice form in his chest. They were twisting everything, making Mariana's help look like part of some elaborate scheme. "We have witnesses who will testify that this Mariana Torres approached the Valdez household under false pretenses," Mendoza continued, pacing before the judge with theatrical precision. "We have evidence suggesting that she may have planted the device herself in order to later discover it and ingratiate herself with a wealthy widower. The timing is simply too convenient to ignore." "That's absolutely false." Ricardo stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "My sister-in-law is the one who—" "Senor Valdez!" The judge's gavel came down sharply. "You will control yourself in my courtroom, or I will have you removed." Ricardo forced himself to sit, his heart pounding with rage and fear. This was exactly what Victoria wanted, to make him look unstable, out of control, unfit to parent. And he was playing directly into her hands. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and Ricardo turned to see Mariana enter, escorted by 2 security officers. She was dressed simply in a navy blue dress that made her look younger, more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. But her eyes, those golden brown eyes that had captivated him from the first moment, held steady with quiet determination. "Your Honor," Mendoza said with barely concealed satisfaction, "we've requested that Mariana Torres be brought in for questioning regarding her involvement in this case." The judge nodded. "Miss Torres, please take the witness stand." Ricardo watched helplessly as Mariana walked past him. For just a moment, her fingers brushed against his shoulder, a touch so brief it might have been accidental, but he felt the reassurance in it nonetheless. Whatever happened, they were in this together. Mendoza approached the witness stand like a predator circling wounded prey. "Miss Torres, if that is indeed your real name, please state for the record how you came to be employed in the Valdez household." "I learned that Senor Valdez's daughter was suffering from an unexplained condition," Mariana said calmly. "I recognized the symptoms from my previous work in medical technology. I offered my assistance." "Your previous work?" Mendoza smiled thinly. "And what exactly was that previous work?" "I was a research engineer at Nexus Medical Technologies, specializing in subcutaneous monitoring devices." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Ricardo saw Victoria's composed expression flicker with something that looked almost like surprise, as if she hadn't expected Mariana to be so forthcoming. "And yet," Mendoza pressed, "there are no records of anyone named Mariana Torres ever working at Nexus Medical Technologies. In fact, there are no records of Mariana Torres existing at all before 3 years ago. How do you explain that?" Mariana was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but softer than before. "Because Mariana Torres isn't the name I was born with." The courtroom went absolutely still. 3 years ago, I was forced to assume a new identity to protect myself from people who wanted to silence me permanently. Mariana's eyes found Ricardo's across the room. "My real name is Marina Castellanos. I was the lead engineer on the NextTrack project at Nexus Medical Technologies, the project that developed the exact device that was found in Camila Valdez's head." Ricardo felt the blood drain from his face. Castellanos. He knew that name. Everyone in Mexican business circles knew that name. "The Castellanos family," Mendoza said slowly, clearly caught off guard. "The pharmaceutical dynasty. My father was Arturo Castellanos, founder of Castellanos Pharmaceuticals. I was his eldest daughter and heir apparent, until I discovered that Nexus Medical Technologies, a subsidiary of our family company, was selling tracking and pain-inducing devices to clients who used them for purposes that were never intended. Stalkers tracking victims, abusive spouses controlling partners, parents punishing children." Her voice hardened. "I gathered evidence and prepared to go to the authorities, but someone warned the company before I could act." "And what happened then?" the judge herself asked, leaning forward with obvious interest. "My father disowned me publicly, claiming I had suffered a mental breakdown. My fiancée, who worked for Nexus, testified that I was unstable and delusional. Every door I tried to open was slammed in my face, and then people started following me, threatening me. Mariana's hands gripped the witness stand railing. I had to disappear, become someone else, or die. Ricardo's mind raced. Marina Castellanos, the heiress who had vanished 3 years ago amid rumors of mental illness and family scandal. He remembered the news coverage, the speculation. He'd never imagined that the truth was so much darker. "This is a very convenient story," Mendoza said, recovering his composure. "But you have no proof." "Actually, I do." Mariana reached into the small bag she carried and produced a USB drive. 3 years of evidence. Financial records showing payments from Victoria Valdez to Nexus Medical Technologies. Communications between Victoria and my former fiancé, Daniel Reyes, who performed the surgery on Camilla while she was unconscious during a routine dental procedure 8 months ago, and recorded conversations in which Victoria explicitly discusses her plan to use the device to build a custody case against Ricardo Valdez. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Victoria Valdez was on her feet, her mask of composure finally shattered. "This is fabricated. She's lying. Your Honor, this woman is clearly mentally disturbed." "Silence!" The judge's gavel came down repeatedly. "Bailiff, secure that evidence. And someone please escort Senora Valdez and her attorney to my chambers. We have much to discuss." As Victoria was led away, her eyes met Ricardo's across the courtroom. The hatred in them was pure and undiluted. The look of someone who had been so close to victory, only to have it snatched away at the last moment. But Ricardo barely noticed. His attention was fixed on Marina, the woman who had just sacrificed the anonymity she'd built over 3 years to save his daughter. The woman who had revealed her deepest secrets in a public courtroom, making herself vulnerable to the very people who had tried to destroy her once before. She stepped down from the witness stand, and he moved to meet her in the aisle between the benches. "You could have told me," he said quietly, aware of the dozens of eyes watching them, "about who you really are, about what you gave up. Would it have changed anything?" Ricardo thought about the woman who had walked into his home uninvited and challenged him without fear. The woman who had knelt down to his daughter's level and shown more genuine care in 5 minutes than a parade of professionals had in months. The woman who had somehow become essential to his life without him even noticing. "No," he admitted. It wouldn't have changed anything at all. For the first time since she'd taken the stand, Marina's composed facade cracked, and he saw the vulnerable woman beneath. The one who had lost everything once and had just risked losing everything again. "I should have told you sooner," she whispered. "I was afraid that if you knew who I really was." "Marina." He reached out and took her hand, not caring who was watching. "I fell in love with the woman who saved my daughter. I don't care what name she uses." Her eyes widened. "Ricardo, this isn't the right moment," he acknowledged, squeezing her hand. "We still have a battle to fight. But when it's over, when Camilla is safe and Victoria is facing justice—" "When it's over," she agreed softly, "we'll have that conversation." But as they left the courtroom together, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the gallery. Daniel Reyes, Marina's former fiancé, his handsome face twisted with cold fury as he observed the woman who had escaped him, holding hands with her new protector. The battle in the courtroom might have been won, but the war was far from over. The Valdez mansion felt different in the days following the courtroom revelation. Lighter somehow, as if the truth that had finally been spoken aloud had lifted a weight from the very walls. Camilla's laughter echoed through the halls more freely now, and even Doña Carmen had been caught humming while she worked, something the stern housekeeper hadn't done in years. But Marina Castellanos, she was still getting used to hearing her real name again, couldn't shake the feeling that they were in the eye of a hurricane. Victoria Valdez had been arrested and was awaiting trial, her assets frozen pending investigation. The custody case had been dismissed with prejudice. By all accounts, they had won. So why did she feel like the worst was yet to come? "You're worrying again." Ricardo's voice came from the doorway of the library, where Marina had retreated after putting Camilla to bed. "I can tell because you get that line between your eyebrows." "I don't have a line between my eyebrows." "You do. It's very endearing." He crossed the room and sat beside her on the leather sofa, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Talk to me. What's wrong?" Marina stared into the fireplace, watching the flames dance. "Daniel is still out there. He disappeared the day after the hearing, and no one has been able to find him. He has access to the same technology that was used on Camilla, and he has every reason to want revenge on me, on you, on anyone associated with my coming forward. My security team is the best in Mexico City. This house is a fortress now. Your security team didn't prevent someone from implanting a device in your daughter's head while she was at a routine dental appointment." Ricardo was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. "You're right. I underestimated the threat once. I won't make that mistake again." He reached over and took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "But I also won't let fear control our lives. Camilla is happy for the first time in almost a year. You're finally free to be yourself again. Those things matter too." Marina looked at their joined hands, his large and strong, hers smaller but no less capable. They had held hands twice now, once in the courtroom, once here in the quiet of the library. Each time it felt like coming home. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly, "about my past, about Daniel." Ricardo shifted to face her more fully. "You don't have to." "I do." She met his eyes directly. "You've trusted me with your daughter, with your home, with your family's safety. You deserve to know who I really am. All of it." She took a deep breath and began. "I was 25 when I started at Nexus Medical Technologies. Brilliant, ambitious, and absolutely certain that I was going to change the world. The technology we were developing, subcutaneous monitoring devices, had such potential for good. Tracking medication levels in patients, monitoring vital signs in the elderly, helping parents keep their children safe." Her voice grew bitter. "I didn't see what it could become in the wrong hands. No one could have predicted. Daniel did." Marina's jaw tightened. "Daniel Reyes, the company's lead surgeon and the man I was engaged to marry. He saw the potential for darker applications from the beginning. He was the one who suggested adding the pain-inducing feature. He called it a compliance mechanism for uncooperative patients. And I was so in love, so blind, that I helped him develop it." Ricardo's hand tightened around hers, but he said nothing, letting her continue. "By the time I realized what was really happening, who was really buying our technology and why, I was in too deep. My name was on the patents, my research had made it possible, and Daniel—" She paused, her voice catching. "Daniel had been using a prototype device on me for months. Whenever I questioned him, whenever I pushed back against his decisions, there would be this inexplicable headache, this overwhelming nausea. I thought I was sick. I thought I was going crazy. That's exactly what he wanted me to think. He controlled you." Ricardo's voice was rough with barely contained anger. "Through pain and manipulation." "Yes. And when I finally figured it out, when I found the device he'd implanted during what I thought was a minor cosmetic procedure, I realized I couldn't trust anyone. Not my family, who had financial ties to Nexus. Not my friends, who were all connected to Daniel somehow. Not the authorities, who could easily be bought." She looked at Ricardo with eyes that held years of pain. "I had to become someone else. I had to disappear completely and rebuild from nothing. And yet you came back." Ricardo reached up to cup her face gently. "You walked into my home knowing the risk. You revealed yourself in that courtroom, knowing what it could cost you. Why? Because of Camilla." Marina's voice was fierce with conviction. "Because when I heard about her suffering, I saw myself in her. A child trapped by someone else's cruelty, crying out for help that no one could provide. I couldn't walk away from that. I couldn't let another innocent person suffer when I had the power to help. And now that Victoria is arrested and the truth is out?" Marina was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Now I'm terrified. Because I've spent 3 years building walls around my heart, convincing myself that I could never trust anyone again, that love was just another weapon that could be used against me. And then you—" She didn't get to finish the sentence. Ricardo closed the distance between them and kissed her, gently at first, then with increasing urgency, as 3 weeks of suppressed longing finally found release. Marina's hands came up to grip his shoulders, pulling him closer, and for a moment the rest of the world simply ceased to exist. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Ricardo rested his forehead against hers. "I'm not Daniel," he said quietly. "I would never hurt you. I would never try to control you. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that if you'll let me." "Ricardo, I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other for a few weeks. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "I love you, Marina Castellanos. I love your strength, your courage, your absolutely infuriating habit of being right about everything. I love the way you care for my daughter like she's your own. And I love the way you make me want to be a better man, a better father than I ever thought I could be." Tears were streaming down Marina's face now, but she was smiling through them. "You're completely insane. You know that, right? Probably. Is that a problem?" "Not even a little bit." She pulled him into another kiss, this one softer, sweeter, filled with the promise of things to come. Neither of them heard the sound of breaking glass until it was too late. The library window shattered inward, and a figure in black dropped into the room with practiced efficiency. Before Ricardo could react, before Marina could even scream, Daniel Reyes was standing before them with a gun leveled at Ricardo's chest. "Hello, Marina," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I believe you and I have some unfinished business." Udi, the gun in Daniel's hand, was steady, his finger resting lightly on the trigger as he surveyed the scene before him. Marina felt Ricardo tense beside her, every muscle in his body coiled to spring, and she gripped his arm in warning. Daniel was many things, brilliant, charming, utterly without conscience, but he was also an excellent marksman. Any sudden movement would end, with Ricardo dead on the floor. "Daniel!" She forced her voice to remain calm, channeling every ounce of the strength she'd built over 3 years of survival. "This won't solve anything. Victoria is already in custody. The evidence is in the hands of the authorities. Hurting us won't change that." "Oh, I'm not here because of Victoria." Daniel's smile was pleasant, almost friendly, which made it all the more terrifying. Victoria was a means to an end, a useful idiot with more ambition than sense. "I'm here because you took something from me, Marina. You took my reputation, my career, my future. Everything I built, you destroyed with your self-righteous crusade. You destroyed yourself when you chose to profit from human suffering. I was building something revolutionary." For the first time, emotion cracked through Daniel's composed facade. "We could have changed the world together, Marina. We could have had everything, money, power, influence, but you had to develop a conscience at the worst possible moment." "A conscience." Marina shook her head slowly. "You implanted a device in me without my consent. You used pain to control me for months, and you call my objection to that a conscience? I call it a missed opportunity." Daniel's gun shifted slightly to point at Ricardo. "But perhaps I can still salvage something from this situation. You see, I've been watching you, Marina, watching how you look at this man, how you care for his daughter. You've built a new life here, a life you care about." His smile turned cruel. "Which means I finally have leverage again." "Don't!" Marina stepped forward, putting herself between Daniel and Ricardo. "Whatever you want, I'll give it to you. Just leave them alone." "Marina, no!" Ricardo tried to pull her back, but she held her ground. "How touching!" Daniel seemed genuinely amused. "The woman who destroyed my life offering to sacrifice herself for her new family. It's almost poetic." He tilted his head thoughtfully. "But I'm afraid it's not that simple. You see, I don't just want you back, Marina. I want you broken. I want you to watch as everything you love is taken from you piece by piece until you understand exactly what you did to me. Papa. Now the small voice from the doorway froze everyone in place. Camilla stood there in her pajamas, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, her eyes wide with confusion and growing fear as she took in the scene before her. "Camilla, go back to your room," Ricardo said, his voice strained with the effort of staying calm. "But I heard a noise and Camilla's gaze landed on Daniel, on the gun in his hand, and her face crumpled. "Papa, I'm scared." "Ah, the guest of honor arrives." Daniel's gun swung toward the child. "Come here, little one. We were just talking about you. Don't you dare." Ricardo's voice was deadly cold. "Touch my daughter and I will end you. I don't care if you shoot me first." Such paternal devotion. It's really quite moving. Daniel seemed to consider for a moment. "But I think we all know how this is going to play out. Marina comes with me willingly, and the child stays safe. Or Marina refuses, and, well, we'll have to see how good this mansion's medical response time really is." Marina's mind raced through options. Daniel was too far away to rush before he could pull the trigger. There were no weapons within reach. Security would have been alerted by the broken window, but they might not arrive in time. She needed to stall, to find an opening, to... Camilla moved. The 5-year-old darted across the room before anyone could react, not toward her father or Marina, but toward Daniel himself. Her small body collided with his legs just as he turned to track her movement, throwing off his balance for a critical half-second. It was all Ricardo needed. He launched himself at Daniel with the force of a man, protecting everything he loved, tackling the surgeon to the ground. The gun went off, the bullet burying itself harmlessly in the ceiling, and then Ricardo's fist connected with Daniel's jaw with a satisfying crack. Marina grabbed Camilla and pulled her to safety behind the sofa just as the library doors burst open. Security personnel flooded the room, followed closely by uniformed police officers who must have been stationed nearby. In seconds, Daniel was pinned to the ground, handcuffs clicking around his wrists as he screamed threats and curses. "Senor Valdez!" The head of security rushed to Ricardo's side. "Are you injured?" Ricardo flexed his hand. His knuckles were bleeding, probably from Daniel's teeth, and shook his head. "I'm fine. Make sure that man never sees the outside of a prison cell." As Daniel was dragged away, still shouting, Ricardo turned to find Marina and Camilla huddled together on the floor behind the sofa. Camilla was crying quietly, her face buried in Marina's shoulder, while Marina stroked her hair and murmured soothing words. He dropped to his knees beside them and wrapped his arms around both of them, holding on tight. "It's over," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's finally over." 6 months later, the gardens of the Valdez estate were transformed into a paradise of white roses and golden candlelight. 300 guests sat in elegant chairs, arranged on the manicured lawn, but Marina had eyes for only one person, the man waiting for her at the end of the aisle with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. Ricardo looked devastating in his black tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, his jaw clean-shaven for once. But it was his eyes that made her heart skip, those dark eyes that had looked at her with suspicion, with curiosity, with growing affection, and now with pure, unconditional love. Camilla walked ahead of her, scattering rose petals with the concentrated dedication of a child, taking her role very seriously. She wore a dress of pale pink that made her look like a princess, and her dark curls were crowned with a wreath of tiny flowers that Marina had helped her choose. When they reached the altar, Camilla tugged on Ricardo's sleeve. "Papa," she whispered loudly enough for the first 3 rows to hear, "don't forget to say 'I do' when they ask you." Laughter rippled through the guests, and Ricardo bent down to kiss his daughter's forehead. "I won't forget, mi amor. I promise." The ceremony was beautiful. Traditional vows spoken with trembling voices, rings exchanged with shaking hands, a kiss that drew cheers from the assembled crowd. But it was the moment afterward, when they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, with Camilla dancing between them, that Marina would remember for the rest of her life. At the reception, held in the mansion's grand ballroom, Doña Carmen approached Marina with tears in her eyes. "I never thought I'd see this house happy again," the housekeeper said, embracing her warmly. "You brought light back into these halls, Señora. You brought light back into all of us." Ricardo's business partner, Miguel Fuentes, raised a toast that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. Camilla made a speech of her own, mostly about how glad she was that Marina was staying forever, and also, could they get a puppy now, that brought the entire room to its feet in applause. And later, when the music slowed and Ricardo pulled Marina into his arms for their first dance as husband and wife, she finally allowed herself to believe that this was real, that she had found her way home. "What are you thinking?" Ricardo murmured against her hair. "I'm thinking about the day I walked into your house uninvited," she admitted. "I was so certain I knew what I would find. A spoiled rich man, a neglected child, another case to add to my files. I had no idea that I was walking into the rest of my life. If I recall correctly, you were rather rude about it. You were being insufferable. Someone had to tell you." Ricardo laughed, the sound vibrating against her chest. "And you've been telling me ever since. I wouldn't have it any other way." The song ended, but they kept swaying together, unwilling to break the spell. "I spoke with the prosecutor today," Ricardo said quietly. "Victoria accepted a plea deal. 20 years, no possibility of parole for at least 15. And Daniel," his jaw tightened, "Daniel will never see the outside of a prison again. Multiple charges of assault, attempted murder, illegal medical procedures. They're still finding victims who were tracked with his devices." Marina closed her eyes, feeling a weight she hadn't known she was still carrying finally lift from her shoulders. "It's really over. It's really over. And now," Ricardo pulled back slightly to look into her eyes, "now we get to start the next chapter. Together." "Papa! Marina!" Camilla came running across the dance floor, her flower crown askew and her face alight with joy. "Abuelita says I can have more cake. Can I, please?" The Ricardo's mother, who had flown in from Guadalajara for the wedding and had already declared Marina the daughter she'd always wanted, waved at them from across the room with a guilty smile. "One more piece," Ricardo conceded. "But then it's time for bed, mi amor." "But it's your wedding, and weddings are exhausting, even for flower girls." Camilla's protests faded as she ran back to her indulgent grandmother, and Marina laughed at the expression on Ricardo's face. "She's going to be completely spoiled by morning," she predicted. "Probably. My mother has been waiting years for a grandchild to corrupt." He pulled her close again as a new song began. "Speaking of which, I've been thinking about the guest house. What about it? It seems a waste, don't you think? All that space, just sitting empty now that you've moved into the main house." Marina raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are you suggesting, Señor Valdez?" "I'm suggesting," he leaned in close, his lips brushing her ear, "that Camilla has been asking for a little brother or sister, rather persistently actually, and the guest house would make an excellent nursery." Marina's heart skipped a beat. "Ricardo Valdez, are you proposing that we have a baby at our wedding reception?" "I'm proposing that we discuss the possibility at some point when you're ready." He pulled back, suddenly uncertain. "Unless you don't want—" She silenced him with a kiss, long, deep, and full of promise. "Ask me again in a year," she said when they finally broke apart. "When Camilla is a little older, when life has settled down, when we've had time to just be us. And then—" She smiled, the kind of smile that lit up her entire face. "Then I'll give you an answer that I think you'll like. A year." Ricardo nodded solemnly. "I can wait a year. I've waited my whole life to find you. What's one more year?" "Incredibly romantic of you." "I have my moments." The reception continued around them, music and laughter, and the celebration of a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. And in the center of it all, two people who had found each other through tragedy and emerged stronger, wrapped in each other's arms, and dreaming of the future they would build together. Outside, in the garden where guests mingled beneath strings of golden lights, Camilla sat on her grandmother's lap and watched her father dance with her new mother. Her head no longer hurt. Her heart no longer ached. And when she closed her eyes and made a wish on the first star of the evening, she wished for nothing at all. She already had everything she needed: